My husband and I had been married for about 5 years when we decided to start a family, and we knew that it was just going to be very simple and we were just going to be able to flip a switch and everything was going to work out, but there was a different plan in place, unfortunately. The pregnancy was going along so smoothly. We had the baby's room ready from about month 3. I had my bags packed from month 4. I had a specific list of everything that we needed and finalized right down to the very last detail. We were so excited by the time we'd made it to week 36 because our doctor said, there's no turning back now. If something happens or something were to go wrong or you to go into labor, we're going to have the baby and the chances of survival are very, very good. So you kind of reach that point of no return is what he called it. And so we were so excited to finally be at that point on the 36th week. After my visit to my OBGYN on Wednesday, I had expressed to him that I was just having difficulty breathing, that it just seemed hard to take a deep breath. And the doctor said to me he thought it was probably allergies or the baby was just getting bigger, which was pretty common. Being my first pregnancy, I didn't know the difference, so I said okay and took him for face value. Went home, and that weekend, on Saturday night, I started having a great deal of difficulty breathing. I actually got up and just took a hot shower, thinking that if I were congested that might relieve some of the pressure in my chest, and it did help for a little while. Went through Sunday as a pretty normal day, with no issues or complications, and by Sunday night I decided I'd just soon sleep in the recliner for 2 reasons. It was I was having difficulty breathing when I was laying down, and it was also more comfortable because I was getting so big to just sleep in a chair. And my husband offered to sleep downstairs with me, and I laughed and told him no, at least one of us should get some rest tonight. But he did keep his cell phone next to the bed, and I promised if I had any problems at all, I would call him. So I went down to our basement where it was cooler, and we actually had a reclining chase lounge, so I climbed in there. Never actually went to sleep. By about midnight, I was gasping for breath. I just could not take a deep breath, and it was coming in very short spurts. I was having to lean on my knees. I know now that they call that tripod breathing to try and catch my breath. So I called my husband up in our bedroom, and he of course immediately came downstairs and said, what do you think's going on? And I said, I'm not really sure, I just know that something's not right, we should probably go to the hospital. So he backed the car out to warm it up because it was January, it was very cold out. We got our bag, we secured our dogs, I gave him all the instructions, he helped me get dressed, and we were ready to go. He then asked me if maybe he should call 911 because he felt like my coloring was getting a little gray and I was starting to really breathe harder. And at first I said no, but within a few minutes I took him up on his offer because I could tell that things were really getting worse. So they arrived, started taking down all my information, immediately put me on oxygen. I was still having a great deal of difficulty breathing, and they expressed to me that they were going to take me immediately to Barnes-Jewish St. Peter's. They asked me if I could get myself onto the gurney to be loaded into the ambulance, and I said yes. And so I would like to say I hopped right up there, but I was 36 weeks pregnant, so that didn't happen. But I climbed up onto the gurney, and they strapped me in and they loaded me into the ambulance. I remember as the ambulance driver was putting me in the back of the ambulance, I looked at him and said, please don't let my baby and I die. Something's not right here. And he said, no ma'am, we're not going to. We're going to take good care of you. And at that point I went unconscious. So that's the last thing I really remember about the whole incident. From what I've been told and what I've read in the medical record, I was then transported to Barnes-Jewish St. Peter's, where I was taken to the emergency room and greeted by Dr. Reed and his staff. And immediately they intubated me or put me on a ventilator because my breathing was so labored. They decided then that the baby was in distress and they took us up for a C-section, an emergency C-section. At that point in time, my husband was greeted by one of the intensive care doctors who told him that she didn't really know at this point what was going on with me. She just knew that I was gravely ill. And then she looked at him very clearly and said, and I even read this in the medical record, I don't know what's wrong with your wife at this point, but I know that she's very critical. I would suggest that you call your family and ask them to get here because I don't think she's going to live through the night. From what I understand, during the C-section, Claire when Claire was born, she was not breathing. When I read through the medical record, it says that her APGAR scores were actually 0 at the time of delivery, and they described her as being limp. As you continue to read the medical record, you find that she was not breathing for almost 30 minutes, and they continued to resuscitate her and do CPR. From what I understand, From stories that I was told later by some of the nurses that were helping in the emergency room that night and had gone up to help perform the C-section, they actually baptized Claire. What we chuckle about now is that she was actually, I think, baptized 3 times in that room, because every nurse who came in would actually perform a baptism. After about 30 minutes of resuscitation, they were getting to the point of calling it and deciding that there was nothing else they could do. She was baptized one last time, and from what I read in the medical record, she took a breath, and her APGAR scores then began to improve. And she was intubated, and at that point the Children's Hospital transport team had arrived to take her down to Children's. I spent the next 7 days in the intensive care unit at Barnes-Jewish St. Peter's. I was intubated majority of that time, and most of that time was in a chemically induced coma to keep me calm while I had the ventilator in. Upon my health improving, they were able to extubate me. They had diagnosed me with peripartum cardiomyopathy. 1 in 15,000 women actually get peripartum cardiomyopathy. I've never won anything in my life, but I won that week. I also had pneumonia, my lung had collapsed, I developed a thyroid condition. So I'd gone from being completely healthy to having all of these things that were brought on by the pregnancy. So they were very concerned about sharing any information with me about Claire or her health that would upset me, because they still were not sure how strong my heart was, and they knew that I had been in complete heart failure. So once I was what they felt like was well enough and strong enough to hear the news, my husband and my father came into the room and sat down with me, and they said, Claire is not doing very well. They've had to move the IV several times. The IV is now in her head, and if that vein does not hold or it collapses, they're going to have to put her on a ventilator, and we're not sure we'll ever be able to get her off of the ventilator. So they asked me to make a decision. If in the event that they had to intubate her overnight or in the next few days, what would I choose to do? So I said to my husband, I'm sorry, I can't make that decision. I can't tell you what I would do, because I've not met her. I've not had a chance to see her. And so they had a conversation, unbeknownst to me, with the intensive care physician at the time, and expressed to him how severe my daughter's condition had become. And they requested that I be moved to Barnes-Jewish Hospital, knowing that I could go through the corridor at Barnes-Jewish Hospital to St. Louis Children's in a wheelchair and actually get to meet my daughter. I was able to be taken off the ventilator. My heart function was coming back up. While I was still very sick, I was going to be able to go out of intensive care, and they made the decision at that point to move me down to Barnes-Jewish Hospital. And so I was taken by ambulance and transferred downtown, where I was placed in a room, and then shortly thereafter got to go by wheelchair to meet my daughter. So they took me into the intensive care unit there at Children's, showed me how to wash my hands, do everything that I needed to do, and my husband pointed to the bed and said, "There's your daughter." She was fussing and kind of looking around, and my husband helped me from my wheelchair. I walked around to the other side of the bed. She was actually looking the opposite way, and I placed my hand on her chest, and I said, "Honey, Mommy's here." And she looked up at me, and she immediately stopped crying, and I could have swore she smiled. That's probably not even possible at that young, but I'm sure that she did. From that point on, Claire's health just began to improve. I visited her every day for the next 42 days, which was the time that she was in the NICU, and we never had to make any more major decisions about her care or what was going to need to be done. I just believe so strongly now that there is such a bond between a mom and a baby. Thanks to my care at Barnes-Jewish St. Peter's and Claire's care at St. Louis Children's Hospital, we are both doing very, very well. Unfortunately, because of the lack of oxygen at birth, Claire did get diagnosed with cerebral palsy. She does not sit or stand or crawl or walk on her own, but cognitively and socially, she's a brilliant little girl, even if I say so as the mother myself. She's doing very, very well. She's actually attending daycare across the street here from Barnes-Jewish St. Peter's at United Services, and so getting her therapy there, and she works with a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, speech therapist every week, and she's just a very happy and bright little girl. You know, starting out my career at Barnes-Jewish Hospital, it was so easy to brag about all the wonderful things we do there. You see them on TV, you see them on the news, we see specials. They just recently did a huge special about care of infants and children at St. Louis Children's Hospital. We know that they do wonderful things, and they're nationally ranked. And so it's very easy to tell about the wonderful stories, but I think so many times our community hospitals get left out of that. And even so much for me, as being a recruiter who tells the great stories about our community hospitals every day, Barnes-Jewish St. Peter's Hospital and the staff there saved my life. They did an amazing job with my care. They truly were very compassionate, they were very caring, and they had the skills that it took, and they were wonderful to me and my family. So many times we don't talk about the miracles that happen at the community hospitals because they don't do transplants and they don't do all of those maybe cutting edge things, but they are saving lives every day, and they truly saved mine and Claire's life that night.